this series is about the fact that all great directors have bad movies, right? Or do they? So far, there's been a director that did not have a bad movie. Is Joachim Trier on that list? We're going to find out. Like, if you're just joining, we're looking at all 5 of Joachim Trier's directorial feature-length scripted films. And I'll throw the disclaimer out again. I will be torturing names on this, but that's the last I'm going to mention it. We're all going to just suffer through my torturing of these things. So let's talk about Joachim Trier. And if you do not Google how to say that in advance, you would say Joachim Trier, but it's apparently Joachim Trier. He was born in Denmark, grew up in Norway. You can really, when you're watching his movies, feel his love for Norway in his work. And the way that he goes about it, a couple of these films were shot in Oslo. He makes Oslo somehow, hold on. I didn't actually Google this. I should have Googled this. What the population of Oslo is? Population of Oslo. 709,000 people, but somehow Joachim Trier makes Oslo feel like a small town, like tight-knit community. It feels much smaller in his first couple of films, and then when you come back to it, it's just like a vibe of like, oh, I accidentally ran into that person. When I first moved to New York, somebody told me you would be shocked at how often you run into somebody you know in New York, despite the multi-million number of people that live in a very small area. And I didn't believe them until I started to run into people in New York, despite the gigantic population. So yeah, that Joachim kind of makes Oslo feel that way. So he grew up around film. His dad was a sound tech in films. His grandfather, Erik Loken, was a screenwriter and filmmaker. He did 2 features, but almost 30 short films. And for a long time, he was the director of Norsk Film, which was a Norwegian film production company that was in business for almost 70 years. It's now defunct. But that was the environment that Joachim grew up around. His dad worked in film. His grandfather was wildly passionate about film. And you can see that passion. You can also see like his Erik Loken, again, his grandfather in his films, there were always very heavy political tones, largely political and emotional tones in it, and you can see the effect that has had, and you see the politics bubble up in Joachim's movies occasionally. And of all the things, like, this guy Joachim started filmmaking when he was a teenage skateboarding champion, and he was making skater films, which, this is going to sound so bad. I was not coordinated enough to skateboard when I was, maybe you'll believe that. I was not coordinated enough to skateboard when I was a kid, but I always loved the idea of making skateboard films. I just didn't really have a friend circle that skateboarded. My brother tried to pick up skateboarding, and he wasn't good at it either, so that just never happened. Fast forward 20 years now, I'm a filmmaker. Okay, so Joachim Trier, one of the other things that really stood out to me throughout all of these films is that he's just a loyal guy, and he builds a loyal community around him. He has repeat actors. He's worked with the same cinematographer on 4 of his 5 scripted feature lengths, Jakob Ire. He has repeated composers, repeated editors, etc. He's been nominated for 9 major awards, and he won a British Independent Film Award in 2021 for The Worst Person in the World. He had 3 nominations for awards at Cannes. He won an Academy, 3 at Cannes, 1 at 1 Academy Award and a BAFTA. So lots of nominations at a very, very high stage. Sure. Now, let's talk about his first film, Reprise. We're going to jump over to Reprise. So Reprise came out in 2006. It took him about 5 years to write. It was co-written by, I didn't write this down here, but by Eskil Vogt, who is somebody that he co-wrote a couple of his films with. It's estimated that Reprise was made for about 22,000 krona, which in my math for 2006 is about $3,000. And then it went on to make about $1.3 million at the box office. So we're talking like a Shane Carruth or Robert Rodriguez level of turnaround from thriftiness to like productive films, from about $3,000 to a $1.3 million box office. This was the first film in what's become known as Trier's Oslo trilogy. None of the films are related except that they happen in Oslo. They're all standalone films, but they do all star an actor, Anders Danielsen Lie. They're all co-written by Eskil Vogt, and they're all directed by Joachim Trier. All the music was also composed by Ella Flodum and edited by Olivier Bouge-Couch. Sorry. And again, I mentioned it, like he have loyal partnerships in all of these things. So these movies are, and this is like this, it's established pretty quickly with his style that Trier does beautiful creative shots whenever he can. He finds ways to work creative shots in, and they don't stand out to you as, oh my God, why did he try that? Or why does he try? It's not blatant that he's trying these things, but he is subtly working them in, and that is an art in itself. And that stands out like almost immediately when you're watching Reprise. The other thing that comes out in Reprise is very much Joachim Trier's voice as a filmmaker. And I say voice not intentionally, but ironically, because he uses almost a Wes Anderson style narration over the story. But it's like if a Wes Anderson movie was paired with a melancholy comedy. I don't know. Has any of you watched a show called Patriot? I'm not talking The Patriot, but Patriot. It was an Amazon series with Michael Dorman, Kurtwood Smith, Terry O'Quinn. If you haven't seen it, that's a damn tragedy. But Patriot was basically the story of a melancholy spy. And it went for 2 seasons, and then like Michael Dorman went on to do For All Mankind, and so that kind of forced the end of the series. But it should have had a 3rd season, and it never did. But it like what Joachim Trier does to me stands out as like Wes Anderson style narrated story, but with the melancholy comedy of a show like Patriot, and that's a really interesting combination. And it starts really with a very Wes Andersonian experience where it delves into like the story of 2 writers, what their stories could have been, and there is definitely an air of like an old style tragic comedy where, you know, these 2 writers, their goals as friends and as people and how they saw their lives unfurling weren't necessarily like all wins. There was no like outright sunshine and rainbows. Both of their lives had ups and downs as projected by this narrator, but then their lives actually unfurl and it's not what they were hoping for. But at the same time, like it was just as comedic / tragic as what actually happened to them, as what they had imagined would be their lives. That's it, very meta, but like that's kind of how it unfurls. It's a movie about the dangers of fulfilling your dreams, and that even when you fulfill, at least to me, when you fulfill your dreams, that's one thing. When you when you think about it in hindsight, you might not remember all of the good things, or the good thing that you had always hoped for and dreamed of may not be the thing that stands out to you in that journey. And there's that, Joachim Trier could have presented this to the viewer as, here is what they dreamed of, and then here's how life happened. And what they dreamed of could have been this fantastic, incredible thing. But what they dreamed of is tragedy almost, and what they got was tragedy in a lot of ways. So they weren't happy in their envisioned arcs, and then they weren't happy in their final arcs. And that's an interesting way to tell a story that you just don't see very often. We're talking Reprise. Fantastic acting, a little bit muddled storytelling. It is slow. If you don't like slow movies, this is not the movie for you. But I would give it a solid A. That takes us to Oslo, August 31st. Oslo, I can do this. Oslo, August 31st, which came out in 2011. This is the second in Trier's Oslo trilogy. It premiered at Cannes, so, he had actually won plenty of notoriety from his first film. There's very little that's known about the budget for this movie, but it did $1.5 million at the box office. I don't feel like, just by watching it, and this is supposed to be judgy, it didn't look like it was a movie that cost a lot to make. It was more narrative driven. We're not talking about any VFX or anything like that. So given that Trier did his first movie for about $3,000 US, it's very likely that this one wasn't wildly expensive too. He brings back Anderson as the star and follows him around as a recovering drug addict who revisits all of his old haunts and friends. And does he visit family members? I don't remember if he visits family members, but he basically revisits his old life for a day, and we watch that unfurl chronologically. It really has all these tones of existential dread over how your decisions as a person have irreversibly damaged or impacted other people. And in his case, is damaged. All of our decisions impact the people around us, positive or negative. And as a recovering addict, he's seeing that his decisions have irreversibly damaged other people, and we experience that with him, which is very sad. And I found myself asking during this movie, did the depression lead to his drug use, or was it the other way around? Because if it was the other way around, if the drug use caused the depression, then him sobering up will cure this melancholy that he has. But if the depression led to the drug use, and I see this in my life sometimes too, not my drug use, but the people around me that I've experienced going through addiction, is if the depression was something that pushed them to the escapism of drug use, of alcohol abuse, then the cure of the addiction only solves one of two problems. You then have to cure the depression. How does he learn to cope with his depression without the sugarcoating that was the drugs? And is it easier? Is it easier to have your depression caused by your downward spiral, or is it easier to have it exist beforehand and then you have two different symptoms to treat when you're going through rehab? It's an interesting question. There's a scene where he's sitting in a coffee shop, eavesdropping on a young woman that's talking about all of her life goals, and it's such a heavy moment. It's very... You're watching somebody in him that has lived through all of these horrible, horrible things. We believe we haven't seen any of them, and he's working on his recovery, and he carries the weight of his decisions with him and you're seeing it juxtaposed against the naivety of this young woman, listing off all of the things that she wants to do in her life. And these are things like I want to fall in love, I want to be respected, I want to become an actress, I would like just the whole gamut. And he's just sitting there overhearing it, and it's such creative writing to create that juxtaposition vibe, of like he's sitting there feeling like there was all of this opportunity and potential for him, and he squandered it. And she's sitting there thinking she has all of this opportunity and potential, and she doesn't know yet that there is a possibility that she squanders it. And the things that she's listing, you as a viewer, you're like, she's totally gonna squander this stuff. So yeah, that was a really cool scene. The other thing is, like, as the protagonist is spiraling, you could tell that he feels alone, but as the viewer, you're sitting here thinking, like, he's not as alone as he thinks, but his guilt over how he's alienated the people around him holds him back from feeling connected to them, and they are trying to connect with him, but he is reluctant or hesitant to connect back with them or feel like they are connected or there for him because he's treated them so poorly, and he's just carrying that guilt with him. The last scene of the movie was really interesting. So, spoiler alert, turn away if you don't want Oslo August 31st ruined. But he sits down at a piano, and he plays the piano, and then he moves on to intentionally overdose on drugs. And I mean, not to push too hard on the term juxtaposition, but it's just hard to not think this guy thinks that he has done so much ugly in his life, but he has this power to do this beautiful thing even right before he's going to make this tragic final decision. That we all have the power to do a beautiful thing, but if we get lost in the dirt and the dark of the bad things that we decide to do, the mistakes that we make, we'll never see the beauty of the things that we could do. So this is like probably one of the, I mean this so lovingly, Joachim Trier, I mean this so lovingly, but this may have been one of the slowest movies I've ever watched, but I loved every minute of it, and I did not want it to end. So I'm going to give it an A. There was an adjustment period where it was like, okay, Joachim Trier's not a very fast storyteller, but he lets you sit and ruminate in the decisions that he's making while he's telling these stories. Which takes us to his only feature-length film that was in English, called Louder Than Bombs. It came out in 2015. It stars a bunch of heavyweights. Can you call Jesse Eisenberg a heavyweight? I don't know about that. But it stars Jesse Eisenberg, Gabrielle Byrne, David Stratham, Isabel Huppert, Amy Ryan, and it has Rachel Brosnahan 2 years before she kind of had her breakout role as Marvelous Miss Maisel. Now, obviously, Bruno, 1 Oslo, 2 Worst Person, 3 Reprise, 4 Thelma. Ooh, I'm gonna argue with you on Thelma. I love it, but I'm gonna argue with you on Thelma. But I know that I'm biased because those like subtle sci-fi films are like, that's my bread and butter, man. I love that stuff. So yeah, So let me just, I got distracted. Sorry. So yeah, Louder Than Bombs. He's basically brought forward Rachel Brosnahan long before her career broke out. She had done House of Cards before that, but like everyone knew who she was that much more after Marvelous Miss Maisel. Now this film, Louder Than Bombs, competed for the Palme d'Or at Cannes, so it did get plenty of praise. It had a much larger budget relative to his first 2 films. It was $11 million budget, and then it did $1.2 million at the box office, so not really wildly successful from a money standpoint. It had been shelved actually in 2013 due to financial issues, but it found funding in 2014 and then just filmed like a couple of months after that. Shot over the course of 8 weeks. The narration is back. The narration that made Reprise somewhat interesting, but this time instead of a third-party narrator experiencing it, we are experiencing the narration from the standpoint of the characters and how they see each other, which is a really nice way to look at them. To get a little bit of transparency into what they're thinking about each other as they're experiencing life. It's I'm rereading the 5 C's of cinematography, and they talk about the viewpoint, whether it's objective or subjective, and getting, without filming something from the perspective of somebody, doing over-the-shoulder shots and having them narrate what they're feeling and how they're viewing the people around them is a pretty powerful storytelling technique. There's this line in it that made me laugh, which is kind of like, again, you earn your laughs in a Joachim Trier film, because there's so much darkness that then every once in a while you get this like piece of light and you want to like go toward the light. There's this scene where Jesse Eisenberg's younger brother goes, "If I had a girl, I would never lie to her," and Jesse Eisenberg just goes, "Okay, good luck with that." It's just when you talk about the ups and downs of life and what you experience as you experience life, and like naivete and everything, that's such a good juxtaposition between him and his much younger brother. I'd never lie to her. Okay, good luck with that. But like, if I had to boil it down, the crux of this whole movie is that we all get advice everywhere that we go, and for just about everything that we do, right? There's advice for almost everything, and if you don't have advice coming at you in rapid succession and you can't tune it out, then you might go find it just by Googling something, right? We have advice coming at us everywhere we go and with everything we do. And sometimes we take that advice and sometimes we don't. We make the best decisions that we can with what we have. And that decision may be good for the people around us, or it may be bad for the people around us. It may be self-serving or not, but they are our decisions, and we all make those decisions, and we all choose whether or not to take the advice around us. And I think that the cool thing about Louder Than Bombs is everybody in the movie has made a bad decision. And every single one of them, at least the main characters, get advice about how to make better decisions. But we see them struggle with, like, should they or should they not make this bad decision, which made it really interesting. With the cast that it had, being his one English movie, I'm putting this thing right up in A tier. Do I want it in A tier? It's a little bit, it feels a little bit more forced. Like, the stakes were higher and he rose to meet those, but it didn't, for an $11 million budget versus a $3,000 budget, it didn't feel like it was almost $11 million more valuable to me than what was done. But I really liked the story. Which takes me to, and Bruno, I'm sorry, but it's my favorite of the Joachim Trier movies, Thelma. Now, don't confuse this with Thelma and Louise, or Thelma, which actually came out in 2024, which is a comedy about an adorable old lady. Thelma is subtle sci-fi, it's romance, it's a psychological thriller, it's a liberation story, it's a whodunit, it's a superhero film, but it's not a superhero film. It's fantastic. So this is, again, co-written by Eskil Vogt, and it, even though it is in a lot of ways very similar crew, a very similar writer, and the same writer. It is not a part of the Oslo trilogy. It was made for a $5 million budget, only did $1.5 million in the box office. This is a good example of what a really thrifty creative filmmaker can do with a moderately small budget relative to, like, you know, $100 million or $50 million, which we see movies every day that come out with those budgets and do much less with it. But Trier shot this in 44 days in Norway and Sweden. It went on to win 13 film awards at film festivals and film awards and festival awards. And it is some of that coming of age, slow burn obsession vibe that you see in Celine Sciamma's Water Lilies, where you have somebody that is falling in love with and or obsessed with somebody. But what happens here that doesn't happen in Celine Sciamma's is that feeling is reciprocated. And in Sciamma's Water Lilies, that feeling isn't reciprocated, and it leads to almost the taking advantage of or abuse of the main character. In this one, it's flip. The main character seems to be taking advantage of the person, but you don't really know that more in depth or more accurately until later on in the film. Because, well, maybe we don't know it officially, but you get the vibe that the unrequited love, or that the requited love, is the result of her powers that she has. Now, I'm not equipped to really talk about this movie from a religion standpoint, and there are a lot of religious undertones, and I get the vibe that there's probably something I don't know about happening in this. I'm sure there were some, and that he probably, in a legendary way, wove actual religious facts or facts and religion. That he wove these tie-ins into this that I just didn't pick up on. But I love this. I mean, the best sci-fi movies are the ones that aren't just like sci-fi. Well, I like some straight up sci-fi, but I would say maybe the best superhero movies or movies where you're in a universe where something is a little bit different, are not the movies where it's like in your face happening. To me, it's sometimes the ones where there's something that's just off throughout the movie, and it's your responsibility to believe in the world that's being painted for you, but also to figure out what it is that's different. Like, what is that rule that's been tweaked? What is that state of matter that's been modified? What is that? Like, is the gravity upside down? And that would be more obvious, but it lets you figure this out while also, again, tackling all of these things. This love, this psychological thriller, there's kidnapping, there's liberation, there's like a whodunit, and she has powers, maybe. So yeah, for that reason, Thelma, to me, fantastic movie. The way that he tells his story is fantastic. I think it's his best. All of this is subjective, but it was really good. But that doesn't take away from the last Joachim Trier movie, The Worst Person in the World. It's a romantic comedy, but it does it without falling into any tropes, cliches, or genre traps, and does it without losing its identity or losing any fun while watching the movie, which is a fantastic thing. So The Worst Person in the World came out in 2021. It had a $5 million budget, and for all intents and purposes was very successful. It had a $12.7 million box office. It won a bunch of awards. It was nominated for Cannes Palme d'Or. Renate Reinsve won Best Actress at Cannes and was nominated for a BAFTA for it. She then went on to star in Presumed Innocent with Jake Gyllenhaal and A Different Man with Sebastian Stan last year. Her co-star, this is the third movie, feature-length film that Anders Danielsen Lie did with Trier, and to me, this was Anders' best performance. I loved him in this, the ups and the downs, but the way that both Anders and Renati carried out their emotions and lived in the scenes is just fantastic. Like this, if there was an award for the most crying in a movie that was believable, I think this one would be in the top 10. And you can see it in the way that this I actually have a note here just scribbled in the margins. Anders Danielson Lee, he's been in 3 of these Trier movies. He's actually a practicing general medicine doctor while doing this acting. Oh man, if anybody can multitask like that and be that good at what it is that they're doing, he deserved some awards for his acting in this in the same way that Renata did. But you can see how that quality carried out into the award season, because it was also nominated for Best International Feature and Best Original Screenplay at the Academy Awards. Didn't win, but I think it made for sure a very strong case. There's this really cool scene in it that's like a long frozen time sequence. You remember the meme where it was something related to to basketball, where a certain song would play and everyone would pause and the camera would like pan through while everyone's paused. Help. It has a scene that's like 10 minutes of that, of this woman running through Oslo to go find somebody that she thinks she's falling in love with. And it's a really cool sequence from a director standpoint. I mean, talk about what you can do with practical effects versus CGI. That whole scene is a win, man. Really cool to watch. And it might be the only time in watching one of Trier's movies where a creative shot was so creative that it removed me from the experience to watch it as like a filmmaker versus like a fan. But it was still very good. In it, there's a line where one of the love interests tells the protagonist that she'd only, when they're breaking up, she basically tells, or he tells her, I can say this more clearly. When they're breaking up, he tells her that she doesn't know what she's giving up, that he's like 15 years older than her in the movie. And he says like, you don't know this yet, but what we have is special and you're never going to find this again. Then years later, she comes back to him. He's dying of cancer, and he's now not available to her because of this. And he's right? She hasn't been able to find that connection that she had with him again. But she asks her to give him kind of a piece of that love back. And even though he's dying, and it would be so easy for him to hold that anger and say like, you left me and I warned you. But he doesn't. I mean, he's downbeaten. He's sad. He's sick of being strong. I think he actually says that at some point. He's like, I'm sick of being strong. I'm sick of telling people that it's going to be okay when I know that it's not going to be okay. She's headed to go potentially start a family with another man, and he just chooses not to say I told you so in a time where he very much could have. And it went from her feeling like he was the worst man, the worst person in the world. And he wasn't in that moment. He was this person that she remembered from her memory. And then he says, I wasted so much time worrying about what could go wrong, but the things that did go wrong were not the things that I worried about. That's like the type of line that you write an entire movie around. But she's going back to like the 5 C's of cinematography and objective versus subjective. This is a scene where we are seeing her as he sees her, and we're seeing him as she sees him, not how they see themselves. And those are two very different things in this moment. She sees herself as this person who made all these mistakes and can't be a good mom. He sees himself as somebody who never did a lot of good and is now stuck dwelling on what's left for him, or what he's done as his life starts to end. So yeah, that was powerful. I mean, it was, I remember things about you that you've forgotten, and when I'm gone, all those things will go with me. That's tragic. Again, this is a heart-wrenching movie. Don't watch it without tissues. The closest scene that I can say was equally as sad that I've experienced recently was in the second season of Shrinking, when Harrison Ford makes a speech at the family Thanksgiving about how he's not going to be able to be strong and he doesn't know how much time he has. And yeah, I mean, equally heart-wrenching. That's how powerful of a storyteller Trier is. If movies were judged on how actors cried on demand, I think this would be a winner. But I think the last thing that really stood out to me about The Worst Person in the World was she gets a call that basically is his friend saying, hey, he's probably not going to survive the night. He was too sick to have his operation. And she chooses to not go see him when she could have. And that struck me as not odd, but I found myself wondering about her motivation and intentions behind that. Why did she not go visit him knowing that it was going to be his last night? Was it to preserve his memory? And if it was to preserve his memory, as somebody who was more vital than he was it preserving it for him so that he wouldn't have the shame of feeling weak in that moment? Or was it for her that she couldn't see him or didn't want to remember him that way? Or is she giving in to that worst person in the world, title, and she just isn't somebody who cares that much unless she needs somebody? There's later on, I mean, not much later on, she runs into this guy that she was going to have a baby with, and he now has a baby with somebody else, and she just goes home and starts editing pictures like she didn't have some wild emotional experience. I don't know. My grandmother lost my grandfather before I was born, and she never opened herself up to love or relationship again after that. And I always wondered why. I thought she could be happy with somebody, but she would just say, I met the love of my life, and I'm grateful for the time that I had with him, and that's over for me. I wonder if it's a little bit of that. She's like, I met my person, and now there isn't another person. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about the other people that I could have had a life with. I just am going to live the rest of my life. I don't know. I'd love to hear more about what you think. Thank